Hey guys, welcome back. Today we're going to talk through the site analysis table, which shows up on our preliminary site plans. We like to do this in Excel so that we can manipulate everything a little bit easier than doing it in CAD. We have a specific way that we want it to look, and we want it to be consistent for all preliminary site plans. So Casey is going to walk us through that site analysis, show us kind of preferences for how we want things to be done and how to make it show up correctly on your plan. So let's learn.
Welcome back, everyone. This is Casey. Today we're going to be going over how to fill out the site analysis sheet in our due diligence Excel spreadsheet. So the site analysis is going to be one of the sheet tabs here. You can select this guy, and this table is going to go onto our preliminary site plans to show our clients exactly what the specifics of the site are. It's going to show off the key information that the client's going to want to see, including their proposed development, the existing conditions, the zoning, etc., etc., etc. So if I go to a preliminary site sheet, as you can see here, this due diligence site analysis table is located here on the sheet. Obviously, this one is not filled out, so we're just going to go ahead and we're going to leave that guy there, but we can go ahead and look at it. And so this is going to be one of the first things you want to do before you send out a preliminary site plan. So if I just go back to our Excel spreadsheet here, we're just going to go through it here using a hypothetical project. So the key thing here is we have two columns here. We have existing and proposed. So the existing conditions is going to be things that are already set in stone about the site. So for example, if there is an existing tenant on the site, then you would write that tenant's name here, and then you would write the square footage of the building for that tenant right here, and then the proposed would be 0. It's existing, so we're not proposing that you rebuild something that's already there, right? And then whatever our proposed tenant is, you would write under the the row below here, and then you would put the square footage of the proposed building under the proposed column here, right? So that's the key thing about this table, is that we have all of our existing stuff and or requirements for things that are, not conditions, rather they're requirements for our proposed development, such as the parking ratio or required number of parking spaces, are going to be in this left column here, or this middle column here. And then anything that's proposed is going to be on this right column here. Okay, so that's the key thing. So let's say, for example, we have a site that is a residential site, and it's located in a residential district, agricultural 1, right? So we might put our existing zoning here as Ag 1, whatever the zoning is. And then let's say that we actually want to propose a rezoning. We would put the proposed zoning under the proposed column as, say, GC for general commercial. Okay, so that's how you would display that we want to go through a rezoning. The existing zoning is Ag 1, and the proposed zoning is general commercial. Okay, whether or not the use is allowed is obviously dependent on the zoning. So if you have some sort of rezoning here, you would have say the zoning. Obviously, if you're rezoning, you're probably rezoning because your intended or desired use is not allowed. So under the required area, you might put no. Or, I like to add in symbols to make mine look kind of fancy, so I might insert a big X. No. Okay, like that. And then in the proposed rezoning, I might put a big check mark, like this guy. Cool, so now there's a check mark. Yes, it's allowed. Are there any use-specific requirements? That's going to depend on the zoning. So if there is, you would put a check mark or yes. And if there aren't any in the rezoning, you'd put no, or vice versa. The flood zone, okay, you're going to want to pull the FEMA map, and you're going to say, okay, this is existing in a flood zone X. So you type zone X. It may be in another flood zone. It may be in zone AE. All right, whatever the flood zone is on the FEMA wetlands map, you're just going to go ahead and punch that in. Zone X. National Wetlands Inventory. If there's a National Wetlands Inventory available with wetlands on site, you might just go ahead and drop a checkbox in this area saying, yes, there are wetlands located on site, and this is verified by National Wetlands Inventory. Overlay districts. All right, overlay districts is an additional requirement if your property is located within the bounds of the overlay district, right? And that overlay district is going to come with a whole slew of additional requirements on top of whatever the zoning requirements are. So you have to go into the Municode and GIS to verify whether or not your site is located within an overlay district. And if it is, then you're going to go ahead and you're going to drop in a yes or a check mark. If it's not, you'll go ahead and you'll drop in a no. Okay, for your tenant names here, okay, you don't want to leave write tenant name here and then write the tenant name here off to the side. Okay, this is where you write the tenant name. The instructions are pretty clear, pretty self-explanatory. So let's say we have an existing tenant on site that is a Popeyes. And then there is a new proposed tenant. The Popeyes went out of business, and now our client wants to renovate this building, or our client wants to tear down this Popeyes and build a Chick-fil-A. So we'd put our existing tenant, maybe a 2,200 square foot Popeyes building, as such. And then we're not proposing to keep the same building, so we're going to put nothing here for this proposed guy. So we'll just go ahead and put a little dash there. And then Chick-fil-A is not existing, so nothing's going to go under the existing column. And then say we're proposing a 2,800 square foot Chick-fil-A building. The total building square footage proposed will be 2,800 square feet, and the total existing square footage is 2,200 square feet. Okay, this might be all located on one parcel since we're tearing down a building. So you can delete these rows as needed. As you can see here, this instructions instruct you to delete the row if it's not needed. So if we only have one parcel, we're just going to go ahead and delete row 14 as well as row 15, which is also row 14. It's going to get rid of our little border there, so I'm just going to go ahead and add that border back, that top, we'll do bottom thick border, thick bottom border. Okay, and now you're going to punch in the acreage of the parcel, okay? So you're likely going to punch in the acreage of the parcel under existing unless you're acquiring more land to make the parcel bigger, right? The parcel size is existing unless it's changing. So let's say the parcel size is 1.32 acres. You punch it in under the existing as such. Okay, building setbacks, right? If you're not going through a rezoning, the proposed column under this is just going to be blank, and your building setbacks are going to be under the existing column. Okay, your building setbacks are going to include all of your major, minor, side, and rear setbacks. So your major setback may be 30 feet. Your minor setback may be, 15 feet. Your side setback may be 10 feet, and your rear setback 5 feet. Okay, landscape strips, same deal. Along a major road, it may be 10 feet, and a minor road, it may be 5 feet. Side road, maybe 5 feet. All right, you might have land use buffers. If your zoning to the south of your property is a residential zoning and you're zoned in commercial, you're probably going to have some sort of land use buffer that could be, quite large. It could be 20 feet. You'd put that under existing. Environmental buffer, same deal, right? If you have a 75-foot buffer for a stream, then you might put 75 foot under environmental buffers, okay? If all of these numbers change due to your rezoning, then there will be numbers here under the proposed column, right? Because your setbacks are going to be different in a general commercial zoning than they would versus an agricultural or residential zoning. Most site analysis sheets are going to be far less complicated than this one that I'm spelling out here, okay? This one is as complicated as they get, right? So you're only going to have a sheet with numbers on both the existing and proposed columns almost all the way down the sheet whenever you know you're going through a rezoning, okay? Say we're not going through a rezoning, right? So there is no proposed new zoning. All of this is going to be blank here, okay, under this first box here, right? And this existing information is going to pretty much fill out everything. We'll go ahead and we'll put a dash in everything just to make sure that it all, give me a weird symbol. Okay, pretend that's a dash. Just to go ahead and show that, hey, there's no information required to be put in this box. The client knows that, hey, we're basically saying this is either unimportant or we don't have this information yet, okay? We want to be very clear to the client about what information we found out, what diligence we've done, and what they've paid for, okay? This is the most important thing when we're doing preliminary site plans, is showing them, here's the diligence that we've collected, here's the site plan that we've come up with, this is what, we're billing you for, okay? If there's no rezoning here, all of this is going to be completely blank here. If there is a rezoning, agricultural to general commercial as it was before, then you're going to put in under the proposed whatever the landscape strips and building setbacks are for the proposed zoning. So say under general commercial, the major landscape strip is 15 feet instead of 10 feet. You'll put 15 feet under the proposed, and so on. Okay. Once you get to your level 2 diligence, it can get a little bit more tricky, right? Parking ratios are typically expressed in some sort of, like ratio to either an existing condition on site or a proposed condition. So sometimes it might be you must provide 10 spaces for every 1,000 square foot of dining space. Well, maybe this Chick-fil-A has 800 square foot of kitchen and other miscellaneous rooms and 2,000 square feet of dining space. Well, we'd have to provide 20 spaces. So the existing requirement would be 10 spaces per 2,000 square foot dining. Okay, and then proposed under our site plan, we might have drawn up a site plan which has 25 spaces. So we'll just go ahead. Well, we'll leave that column blank, and then the number of parking spaces will be 25. And due to this ratio, 10 per 2,000, or sorry, excuse me, it should be 10 per 1,000 square foot of dining, and we have 2,000 square foot of dining. That means the required, as you can see, this required text here under the existing column, the required number of parking spaces would be 20. Right, so the client can look at this row here and say, we have 20 parking spaces required, and our site plan has 25, so we meet that requirement. Parking's not something you'll have to get a variance for, or something that we'll have to rework this plan to accommodate for. Parking size, the requirement may be 9 by 18 foot parking spaces, so you just go ahead and put 9 by 18 feet is the required parking size. Say our client likes a little bit bigger spaces. Maybe we're doing a car wash instead of a Chick-fil-A, and they like nice, real big spaces so that people have plenty of room to wash their car. And we're doing 10 foot by 18 foot spaces, right? So our proposed parking size is 10 by 18, whereas the required parking size is 9 by 18, right? Compact parking percentage, right? It might be 10%. We might 10% max, right? The compact parking percentage is typically a maximum number of spaces you can have as compact parking versus a minimum. But just because a client may not know that, if they're not familiar with land development, you might go ahead and add the verbiage max. So it may be 20%. So you might put 20% max, right? And our proposed might just be 0%. We don't often add compact parking spaces, so we might have 0%. Loading space, there may be none required, in which we'll put blank, or we'll put none required if there's not one required. If we put blank, it looks like we haven't done the diligence on that yet. So we're just going to go ahead and put none. So proposed, none, right? Same deal with open space percentage, lot size, frontage, etc. Adjacent zoning north. Okay, there's not going to be any new proposed adjacent zonings, right? We can't rezone the properties adjacent to us unless we own them, which in most cases the client doesn't. So the adjacent zoning north is going to be whatever the zoning is to the north, east, south, and west of our property. So say our frontage is along the north, okay, we might just put none because we're not we're not adjacent to another property to the north. We're fronting a road to the north. To the south, it may be residential. It may be a residential, R15. To the east, it may be, again, R15. And to the west, it may be general commercial. Okay, water sewer proximity. Again, we're going to see how close are we to water sewer. So if we're fronting a road along that northern property line, and it's a big major road, we're probably pretty close to water sewer. Maybe we can find a map for that on GIS. Maybe we can call and get something sent to us and say, okay, cool. Here's a water main 10 feet away from our property line. We'll just go ahead and put 10 feet under the existing tab. Okay, overlay requirements. Again, that depends on if there's an overlay district, right? So in our hypothetical here, we do have an overlay district. So then we put, a checkbox. It's impossible to list all of the overlay requirements within this guy, but if there's any specific ones that are particularly pertinent to our project, we might be able to list those here in this box, okay? So now that we've gone through with our hypothetical site here, I just want to reiterate some of the key points. You don't need to include a total building square footage if there's only one building. So if we're only building one brand new 10,000 square foot building on a completely blank piece of property, there'd be no reason to put a total building square footage because there's only one building, so you don't have to add up multiple buildings. Okay, same thing with the parcels. That's why we deleted those two rows earlier in this video. Okay, and then the two columns, existing and proposed. Just stop for a second. If you don't know where you're supposed to put a piece of key information, just think, is it something already existing that's already there, located on site, or a requirement, or jurisdictional piece of code that's already existing, all right, and relevant to our site? It's probably going to go on the existing tab. If it's something that our client wants to do, they want to have a certain number of parking spaces, or we proposed a certain number of parking spaces. They want to have a building of, X size. They want to have, a really big backyard with a ton of trees. They want to have a really big buffer between the factory that they're building and the residential, dwelling spaces that are, behind this factory, right? All of that's going to go under the proposed tab here, okay? And then once you've made your site analysis table, you can just go ahead and grab the whole thing in Excel. You can do Control-C to copy, and then you're going to go ahead and go to your CAD here. So I'm going to go to my CAD, and then just Control-V, and it's going to paste in. All right, cool. And then one thing you'll notice is that this guy, and you can grab it and scale it to make it a little bit bigger. So we're going to scale it so it's a more appropriate size. This one here, under the Properties pane, the plot quality is high graphics. Okay, that's what we want. We want it to show up in color here, just like it does in Excel. Whenever you copy and paste it, it's gonna show it's gonna copy and paste in or import in with a plot quality of monochrome. Okay, we don't want it to show with monochrome. It's gonna look black and white. It doesn't look as good. So you're going to change monochrome to high graphics before you plot your sheet. So we can delete that old one that's just there as a template and to remind us to do it. We can drop the new one in. We can go ahead and scale this guy just a little bit smaller so that it fits a little bit better. Boom. And now we have our site analysis table, which gives a really good scope on all of the existing and required things, pieces of information about the site, and then the amount of parking we were to get, the proposed things that our client wants, so that they can see all the key things, all the key pieces of information that came from our period of doing diligence, as well as whether or not we meet the jurisdiction requirements and or meet the client's desires for their site.